A woman whose Instagram name is the Fat Sex Therapist gave a speech at St. Olaf College on Thursday in which she compares fitness instructors to Nazis and putting children on diet to rape. Quote, she said, "I truly believe that a child cannot consent to being on a diet the same way a child cannot consent to having sex," in her 2-hour speech at the college main stage. Another quote, "We should be critical of the use of science and production of knowledge to continue promoting this idea that certain bodies are fit, able, and desirable. It is my fatness that caused my high blood pressure, or it is my experience of weight stigma." So she said, is it my fatness that caused my high blood pressure? Yes, it is. Or is it my experience of the weight stigma? No, it isn't. It's your fault. She took it even further, calling the science that states that obesity is unhealthy is, quote, fat-phobic science, saying that it is often actually eugenic science. Eugenic science is Nazi science. No, it's just science. It's not eugenic science. And these are me adding, obviously. I think it's that the man... Oh, and then she went on to make this connection. "I do not think it's surprising that the man who shot up Christchurch, New Zealand, was also
disgusting.
A fitness instructor. A clear communication that there's still an idealized body." And then she said, "Nazis really love the idea of an idealized body, and so it makes a lot of sense to me that a fitness instructor might also think that an idealized body in this thin white supremacist way." The 2-hour speech, and it just goes on like this for... I couldn't find the whole speech, but I did find clips. And she talks about how... Here's the quote. Where does she say? The children part. Seeing is one thing, child's health. She said that, because a child can't consent, putting him on a diet is fucking rape. That was her quote, which is...
She said it's fucking rape?
Yeah. Disgusting.
So eugenics, the science of improving a human population by controlled breeding to increase the occurrences of desirable heritable traits or characteristics, developed largely by Francis Galton as a method of improving the human race, it fell into disfavor only after the perversion of its doctrines by the Nazis. So eugenics is a term that is very often correlated with the Nazis and their desire to create a supreme race. However, Caleb, as you said, it is science, but I think the implementation of the science has been historically considered to be associated
negative,
with, yes, there's a negative connotation to it. I love you, bro. Like I love having conversations with you every week. And sometimes I feel like, and it's not just you, people have a tendency to get caught up on identity politics. So my first train of thought was, I need to go and find a quote from where this lady says it, because you sent me a link to the National Review, which I do believe is a slightly conservative site. I typed in,
it's even past slightly. I think it's very conservative.
I typed in "fat sex therapist compares to Nazis" at a college speech, and several articles came up. And I would say 75% of them were more conservative news sites. And I didn't want to base my whole case, my whole debate or argument on this thing, because I couldn't find the actual clips from her. I found clips where people were narrating over the top, like the audio was dropped out, but we could see video of her, and they were summarizing what she was saying. That said, the quotes are consistent from outlet to outlet, and I went and decided to visit Olaf University to watch the entire video, and it's been pulled.
Oh, nice. I didn't...
So there's two reasons why.
I was like, I couldn't find that. So excited.
Yeah, no, you couldn't find it because it doesn't exist. So A, people on the right were being so aggressive and so hateful to her that the university just decided to pull it because it was too controversial, or the university saw it and said, oh my God, this is completely damaging to our brand, to our institution. We've got to get rid of this immediately. So I was going to just kind of get on you about the meaning of hyperbole. Maybe she was a comedian. Maybe she was saying this stuff in jest as a way of just kind of getting a rise out of people. But as I read her quotes, I just started to get more and more angry. And Jesus, dude, if it's true, if we're taking it at face value that this lady said what she said, she is so much more than a fucking idiot. She is a dangerous person who is spreading misinformation about science based on her feelings, and it is just completely inaccurate. It's false, and it is like it's peddling the worst kind of advice, because you and I have talked about it before. Nobody's life has, maybe some people, most people's lives will never be improved by being ridiculed, by being looked at as the other, by having people be cruel to them. But if your defense mechanism is to lash out and say fitness instructors, people whose job it is to try to improve the lives of others, and comparing them to Nazis, it's just despicable.
Well, and that was me, because I did the same thing. I knew National Review. I'm not a person who frequents our site by any stretch. It's probably the first article I've ever read, but I've heard about them. I think they're pretty extreme right.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but I think they are. So I was the same thing, where I was like, well, I want to hear it, because everything gets taken out of context and switched around. And same thing I found is every article I could find was pretty consistent. And for me, this is like a hot button issue to me, especially childhood obesity. Is one of those things that makes my blood boil to no end. It's so perfect example. Last week, my back was killing me. So I went to the doctor, went to the chiropractor, and something that I knew, I'm a little hunched, my back's curved, my spine. And I was like, is there any way to repair that? They're like, probably not. It would have to be surgery. And I told them about how I used to be obese, and they said something that I've read online before, but never had it confirmed from a doctor. They said, well, when did your obesity start? I said, as a child. And they said, that's very common. Kids who are obese children tend to have a curved spine because of the weight pulling them down when their bones are soft. Then you get older and your bones stiffen, and it's they said, I can work at getting my back straighter, but it'll never be 100% straight, and I'm gonna have back problems for the rest of my life. They said, what we're going to try to do is combat that and make them as good as humanly possible. But they're like, you're kind of fucked, essentially, from being an obese child. So this article comes out like right around the time I get out of the doctor and hear that shit, and it just really made my blood boil, because if she wants to be fat, fine, that's her business. That being said, I've said this a million times, we should not be mean to fat people. We should not fat shame.
Right.
I don't support that. As someone who has spent their entire life morbidly obese, I've been on that side, and it's a horrible feeling. But for this bitch, and I'm going to use the word bitch because she pissed me off that bad, to go out there and peddle this stuff, it is harmful to children. It is not healthy for anyone, let alone a child, to be obese. It is irresponsible. And it just, it really, not a lot of stuff triggered me. This article triggered me.
So a fat therapist recently gave a talk at St. Olaf College in Minnesota, which, side note, Olaf College was founded by Norwegians, as was that area in Minnesota a couple hundred years ago. So shout out to Norway. Love you, baby. My wife's from Norway. In which she compared personal trainers to Nazis and equating putting children on a diet to sexual assault. That one is another one that really got me. She said, I truly believe that a child cannot consent to being on a diet the same way a child cannot consent to having sex. Her name is Sanala Rashatwar, and she proclaimed, I experience diet culture as a form of assault because it impacts the way that I experience my body. Okay, so now if a parent encourages children to get on a diet, they are sexually assaulting their children.
To me, so children can't consent to a lot of things. This is dangerously close to the anti-vax community, because you could use this logic. Well, they can't consent to medication. They can't consent to vaccine. There was even, I read an article a long time ago about women saying you should ask for consent before you change a diaper. What the hell's the baby going to say?
What?
I read an article. It was about a year ago. So a college professor at some university gave another speech, and same thing. She was like, you should ask for consent. Babies, kids can't consent to things. It's your job as an adult and as a parent to make the best decisions possible for your child. And if your child is obese, putting them on a diet and encouraging exercise and healthy eating habits is not abuse. That is the greatest form of love. This lady just has some weird hangups about her weight, which I get. I've been there. But I just, like you, what she's spouting is dangerous. And then it's also really trivializing sexual assault of children.
And what the Nazis did. Jesus Christ. Yes, it's the worst. It's the worst sort of, and obviously it got her publicity. She starts off the talk by saying, tonight we're going to be talking about how to politicize our definition of body image, because oftentimes we get stuck thinking of it from a white supremacist lens. Fat-phobic science is often actually eugenic science. Eugenic science is Nazi science. She went on to criticize the 80s Reagan-era style politics and called diet a non-consensual assault, saying that children can't consent, blah, 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 blah. And then, and I think you mentioned this, and then she asserted that the fitness contributed to the recent shootings in New Zealand. I don't think it's surprising at all that the man who shot up Christchurch in New Zealand was also a fitness instructor. Like, he went and targeted fat people.
To me, and you see this a lot, and you see it on the left and the right, to clarify. But you'll see people with extreme positions, and I, honest to God, think some mental problems, some mental issues, being held up as people. There's someone on the right who, notorious troll Milo Yiannopoulos. There's definitely, when you hear him talk, in my opinion, some mental stuff he needs to work through. Same thing with Alex Jones. Obviously, some very strong mental things he needs to work through. Stop posting up crazy people with radical ideas. Stop praising them and giving them, well, I don't want to say don't give them a platform, because I think everyone should have the platform, but of course they're going to receive backlash. It just seems like there's this new push of the crazier you are and the more extreme, like, that's what's in right now. Like, people just want, there's no moderation. Like, the fat acceptance thing should be pretty much, being fat is super unhealthy and we should try to cut down on obesity. It's going to end up with a high healthcare cost and a lot of people dead. But don't be a piece of shit and be mean to fat people. That's pretty much what the fat acceptance thing should be. But it's not. It's either people on the right who are like, no, scream at fat people because that'll motivate them to work out. No, it won't. It'll make them fatter. Or people on the fat acceptance movement who are like, don't ever say anything. And this isn't science. Science doesn't prove that being fat hurts you. Yes, it does. We know this. It's fact at this point.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. It got me heated. Again, kind of trying to approach it from this idea of like, maybe she was misquoted. Maybe she was because comedians can say a lot of these kind of similar things in a way that, like it's a bit. It's kind of being hyperbole. They do try to find these kind of correlations between it, but this was a very straightforward empowerment kind of seminar where she was going in there to make people feel good about themselves, which ultimately, that's a great thing. You know what I mean? If you can go and find a group of people that are not necessarily the most confident and don't feel great about themselves, and you can offer them something that's going to make them feel more accepted, make them feel more like that, like have a better sense of self-value, then that is a wonderful thing. But it's this spreading of misinformation, this idea of fake news, when people like Alex Jones are being banned, when people like InfoWars are being banned because they're propagating misinformation, then it very much needs to apply across the board, because this woman was very much like you said with the anti-vaxxers. She is very much peddling a fringe idea that is not based on science, that's based on emotionality and based on, I guess, this idea of woke thinking that we just should accept everything and everybody regardless of if it's acceptable or not.
Yeah, it's definitely a dangerous minority. And then I think this is fringe. I don't think she's indicative of the left in its entirety. So I really don't. I think she's as fringe as the people on the right who say crazy shit. I really believe that. I hope I'm right. Um, but one of those things I cannot stand, and I think you and me agree on this, is the anti-science crowd. I'm talking flat earthers,
Yeah.
climate change deniers. This lady, like, there is science, and we should respect that as much. And if the science changes, we find new information, we should update, obviously. But I just cannot stand science deniers, and they're on anymore. I would have said even like 20 years ago, if you would ask me with science deniers, I would have said they were all on the right. Like 99% of them, fell on the right.
Yeah.
And now they've kind of dispersed depending on the issue to both sides.
Well, and that's a really good point. It's like if you're going to ridicule flat earthers because of the fact that they outright reject science, or you're going to, talk about climate change deniers and all of that. These are things that are kind of seen as like liberal issues. But then on the other side, you can't create your own like bullshit fringe pseudoscience and then ridicule people for their weird and crazy ideas. It's all the same thing.
Yeah, it's all people operating because of emotions, or a lot of times on the right because of faith.
Yeah.
And personally, I feel like what she's doing is a lot more damning than a flat earther. Like, what does flat earther do? It doesn't hurt anyone. It's stupid, but it doesn't hurt anyone. This is actually damaging, I think, to someone. If you're a young, impressionable 13-year-old and you're overweight, and I've been there, you get picked on constantly, and you're looking for answers. I would rather you find the answers of, this is unhealthy, and let's work toward getting you to a good body weight because your life will be better, than everyone who hates you is a white supremacist, and your body is your body. Love yourself no matter what. Because, yeah, I think you should love yourself. But at the same point in time, if I had that mentality, I'd be 400 pounds still and have a lot of health issues. Who knows? I may not have survived my cancer scare. The doctor said if I was that weight, that surgery would have been much, much harder. And I don't know. Like I said, I rarely get triggered. This is one of the few articles that I got triggered on and got me really angry.
Hopefully nobody